Chapter 9 of The Trail of the Hawk. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti. Trail of the Hawk by Sinclair Lewis. Chapter 9. The day of Professor Frazer's next lecture, a rain-sodden day at the end of October, with the stubble fields bleakly shelterless beyond the campus. The rain splashed up from pools on the worn brick walls and dripped from trees and whipped about buildings, soaking the legs and leaving them itchingly wet and the feet sloshingly uncomfortable. Carl returned to his room at 1, talked to the Turk, his feet thrust against the side of their rusty stove. He wanted to keep 3 o'clock, the hour of Frazer's lecture, from coming. "I feel as if I was in for a fight. Scared to death about it. Listen to that rain outside. Gee, but the old dame keeps these windows dirty. I hope Frazer will give it to them good and hard. I wish we could applaud him. I do feel funny, like something tragic was going to happen." Tie that dog outside," yawned the Turk, staunch adherent of Carl, and therefore of Professor Frazer, but not imaginative. "Come on, young girl. I'll play you a slick little piece on the mouth organ, eh?" "Oh, thunder, I'm too restless to listen to anything except a cannon." Carl stumped to the window and pondered on the pool of water flooding the graying grass stems in the shabby yard. When it was time to start Professor Frazer's lecture, the Turk blurted, "Why don't we stay away and forget about it? Get her off your nerves. Let's go down to the bowling alley and work up a sweat." "Not a chance, Turk. He'll want all the supporters he's got, and you'd hate to stay away as much as I would. Feel cheered up now. All ready for the scrap. Yep, come on." "All right, Governor. I like a scrap, all right, but I don't want to see you get all worked up." Through the rain, across the campus, an unusual number of students in shining, cheap black raincoats were hastening to the 3 o'clock classes, clattering up the stone steps of the academic building, talking excitingly, glancing up at the arched door as though they expected to see something startling. Dozens stared at Carl. He felt rather important. It was plain that he was known as a belligerent, a supporter of Professor Frazer. As he came to the door of Lecture Room A, he found that many of the crowd were deserting their proper classes to attend the Frazer event. He bumped down into his own seat, gazing back superciliously at the outsiders who were edging into unclaimed seats at the back of the room or standing about the door. Students from other classes, town girls, the young instructor in French, German, and music, a couple of town club women in glasses and galoshes and woolen stockings, bunchy at the ankles. Everyone was rapidly whispering, watching everyone else, peeping often at the platform and the small door beside it, through which Professor Frazer would enter. Carl had a smile ready for him, but there was no chance that the smile would be seen. There must have been 150 in the room, seated and standing, though there were but 70 in the course, and but 256 students in the whole college that year. Carl looked back. He clenched his fist and pounded the soft side of it on his thigh, drawing in his breath, puffing in and out a long, exasperated hell. For the Greek professor, the comma-sized, sandy-whiskered marionette to whom nothing that was new was moral, and nothing that was old was to be questioned by any undergraduate, stalked into the room like indignant Napoleon, posing before 2 guards and a penguin at St. Helena. A student in the back row thriftily gave the Greek god his seat. The god sat down with a precise nod. Instantly a straggly man with a celluloid collar left the group by the door, whisked over to the Greek professor, and fawned upon him. It was the fearless editor and owner, also a part-time typesetter, of the Plato Weekly Times, who dated back to the days of Washington, flat-bed hand-presses, and pure Jeffersonian politics, and feared neither man nor devil, though he was uneasy in the presence of his landlady. He ostentatiously flapped a wad of copy-paper in his left hand, and shook a spatter of ink drops from a fountain pen as he interviewed the Greek professor, who could be seen answering pompously. Carl was hating them both, fearing the Greek as a faculty spy on Frazer, picturing himself kicking the editor when he was aware of a rustling all over the room, a general turning of heads toward the platform. He turned. He was smiling like a shy child in his hero worship. Professor Frazer was inconspicuously walking through the low door beside the platform. Frazer's lips were together. He was obviously self-conscious. His motions were jerky. He elaborately did not look at the audience. He nearly stumbled upon the steps up to the platform. His hands shook as he drew papers from a leather portfolio and arranged them on the small reading table. One of the papers escaped and sailed off the platform nearly to the front row. Nearly everyone in the room snickered. Frazer flushed. A girl student in the front row nervously bounded out of her seat, picked up the paper, and handed it up to Frazer. They both fumbled it, and their hands nearly touched. Most of the crowd laughed audibly. Professor Frazer sat down in his low chair, took out his watch with the twitching hand, and compared his time with the clock at the back of the room. And so closely were the amateur executioners observing their victim that every eye went back to the clock as well. Even Carl was guilty of that imitation. Consequently, he saw the editor standing at the back, make notes on his copy paper, and smirk like an ill-bred hound stealing a bone. And the Greek professor stared at Frazer's gauche movements with a grim smugness that indicated quite the sort of thing I expected. The Greek's elbows were on the arm of the seat, and he held up before his breast a small red leather-covered notebook, which he superciliously tapped with a thin pencil. He was waiting, like a judge of the Inquisition. "Old Greek's going to take notes and make a report to the faculty about what Frazer says," reflected Carl. "If I could only get hold of his notes and destroy them." Carl turned again. It was just 3. Professor Frazer had risen. Usually he sat while lecturing. 50 whispers commented on that fact. 50 regular members of the course became self-important through knowing it. Frazer was leaning slightly against a table. It moved an inch or two with his weight. But by this time every one was too high-strung to laugh. He was pale. He rearranged his papers. He had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. In the now silent, vulturously attentive room, smelling of wet second-rate clothes, a gusty rain could be heard. They all hitched in their seats. "Oh, Frazer can't be going to retract," groaned Carl. "But he's scared." Carl suddenly wished himself away from all this useless conflict, out tramping the wet roads with the Turk, or sloshing through the puddles at 35 miles an hour in the banker's car. He noted stupidly that Jeannie Linderbeck's hair was scarcely combed. He found he was saying, "Frazer'll flunk, flunk, flunk. He's going to flunk, flunk, flunk." Then Frazer spoke. His voice sounded harsh and unrhythmical, but soon swung into the natural periods of a public speaker as he got into his lecture. "My friends," said he, "a part of you have come here legitimately to hear a lecture. A part to satisfy the curiosity aroused by rumors to the effect that I am likely to make indecorous and indecent remarks, which your decorum and decency make you wish to hear, and of which you will carry away evil and twisted reports to gain the reputation of being fearless defenders of the truth. It is a temptation to gratify your desire and shock you, a far greater temptation than to be repentant and reactionary. Only it occurs to me that this place and time are supposed to be devoted to a lecture by Henry Frazer on his opinions about contemporary drama. It is in no sense to be given to the puling defense of a martyr, nor to the sensational self-advertisement of either myself or any of you. I have no intention of devoting any part of my lecture, aside from these introductory adumbrations, to the astonishing number of new friends whose bright and morning faces I see before me. I shall neither be so insincerely tactful as to welcome you, nor so frightened as to ignore you, nor shall I invite you to come to me with any complaints you have about me. I am far too busy with my real work. I am not speaking patiently. I am not patient with you. I am not speaking politely. Truly, I do not think that I shall much longer be polite. Wait. That sounds now in my ears rhetorical. Forgive me. and translate my indiscretions into more colloquial language. Though from rumors I have overheard, I fancy some of you will do that anyway. And now, I think you see where I stand. Now then, for such of you as have genuine interest in the brilliant work of Bernard Shaw, I shall first continue the animate visions on the importance of his social thought, and endeavor to link it with the great and growing vision of H.G. Wells, novelist and not dramatist though he is, because of the significance of his new book, Kipps and Mankind in the Making, and point out the serious purpose that seems to me to underlie Shaw's sarcastic picture of life's shams. In my last lecture I endeavored to present the destructive side of present social theories as little as possible, to dwell more on the keen desire of the modern thinkers for constructive imagination. But I judged that I was regarded as too destructive, which amuses me, and to which I shall apply the antidote of showing how destructive modern thought is and must be, whether running with sootily smoking torch of individuality in Bakunin, or hissing in Nietzsche, or laughing at Olympus in Bernard Shaw. My radicalism has been spoken of. Radical! Do you realize that I am not suggesting that there might possibly some day be a revolution in America, but rather that now I am stating that there is, this minute, and for some years has been, an actual state of warfare between capital and labor. Do you know that daily more people are saying openly and violently that we starve our poor, we stuff our children with useless bookishness, and work the children of others in mills, and let them sell papers on the streets in red-light districts at night, and thereby prove our state nothing short of insane? If you tell me that there is no revolution because there are no barricades, I point out to actual battles at Homestead, Pullman, and the rest. If you say that there has been no declaration of war, open war, I shall read you editorials from the Appeal to Reason. Mind you, I shall not say whether I am enlisted for or against the Revolutionary Army, but I demand that you look about you and understand the significance of the industrial disturbances and religious unrest of the time. Never till then will you understand anything. Certainly not that Shaw is something more than an enfant terrible. Ibsen something more than an ill-natured old man with dysphoria and a silly lack of interest in skating. Then you will realize that in the most extravagant utterances of a red-shirted strike leader there may be more fervent faith and honor, oftentimes, than in the virgin prayers of a girl who devoutly attends Christian Endeavor, but presumes to call Emma Goldman, that dreadful woman. Follow the labor leader, or fight him, good and hard, but do not overlook him. But I must be more systematic. When John Tanner's independent chauffeur, of whom you have, I hope you have, read in Man and Superman, Carl looked about. Many were frowning, a few leaning sidewise to whisper to neighbors with a perplexed headshake that plainly meant, "I don't quite get that." Wet feet were shifted carefully, breath caught quickly, hands nervously played with lower lips. The Greek professor was writing something. Carl's ex-roommate, Plain Smith, was rigid, staring unyieldingly at the platform. Carl hated Smith's sinister stillness. Professor Frazer was finishing his lecture. "If it please you, flunk this course. Don't read a single play I assign to you. Be disrespectful, disbelieve all my contentions, and I shall be content. But do not, as you are living souls, blind yourself to the fact that there is a world-wide movement to build a wider New World, and that the world needs it, and that in Jamaica Mills, on land owned by a director of Plato College, there are 2 particularly vile saloons, which you must wipe out before you disprove me. Silence for 10 seconds, then. That is all." The crowd began to move hesitantly, while Professor Frazer hastily picked up his papers and raincoat, and hurried out through the door beside the platform. Voices immediately rose in a web of talk, many-colored, hot-colored. Carl babbled to the man next to him. "He sure is broad. He doesn't care whether they're conservatives or not. And some sensation at the end." Eh? What? Him?" The sophomore was staring. "Yes. Why, sure. What do you mean?" demanded Carl. "Well, and what do you mean by broad?" "Sure. He's broad, just like a razor edge." "Huh?" echoed the man down the row, a Y.M.C.A. senior. "Do you mean to say you liked it?" "Why, sure. Why not? Didn't you?" "Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. All he said was that scarlet women like Emma Goldman were better than a C.E. girl, and that he hoped his students would bluff the course and flunk it, and that we could find booze at Jamaica Mills, and a few little things like that. That's all. Sure. That's the sort of thing we came here to study." The senior was buttoning his raincoat with angry fingers. "That's why the man was insane. And the way he denounced decency and I can't talk about it." "Well, by gosh, of all the sputtered Carl. You and your Y.M.C.A. calling yourself religious and misrepresenting like that. You and your Why, you ain't worth arguing with. I don't believe you came to study anything. You know it all already." Passionate but bewildered, trying not to injure the cause of Frazer by being nasty, he begged, "Straight. Didn't you like his spiel? Didn't it give you some new ideas?" The senior vouchsafed, "No, me and my Y.M. didn't like it. Now, don't let me keep you, Ericson. I suppose you'll be wanting to join dear Mr. Frazer in a highball. You're such a pet of his. Did he teach you to booze? I understand you're good at it." "You apologize or I'll punch your face off," said Carl. "I don't understand Professor Frazer's principles like I ought to, but I'm not fighting for them. Probably would if I knew enough, but I don't like your face. It's too long, just like a horse's face. It's an insult to Frazer to have a horse-faced guy listen to him. You apologize for having a horse face, see? You're bluffing. You wouldn't start anything here anyway. Apologize." Carl's fist clenched. People were staring. "Cut it out, will you? I didn't mean anything." "You wouldn't," snapped Carl, and rammed his way out, making wistful boyish plans to go to Frazer with devotion and offers of service in a fight whose causes grew more confused to him every moment. Beside him, as he hurried off to football practice, strode a big lineman of the junior class, cajoling, "Calm down, son. You can't lick the whole college." "But it makes me so sore." "Oh, I know, but it strikes me that no matter how much you like Frazer—" "He's gone pretty far when he said the anarchists had more sense than decent folks." "He didn't. You didn't get him. He meant— Oh, Lord, what's the use?" He did not say another word as they hastened to the gymnasium for indoor practice. He was sure that they who knew of his partisanship would try to make him lose his temper. "Dear Lord, please just let me take out one bonehead and beat him to a pulp, and then I'll be good, and not open my head again," was his perfectly reverent prayer as he stripped before his locker. Carl and most of the other substitutes had to wait, and most of them gossiped of the lecture. They all greedily discussed Frazer's charge that some member of the corporation owned saloon lots, and tried to decide who it was, but not one of them gave Frazer credit. 20 times Carl wanted to deny. 20 times speech rose in him so hotly that he drew a breath and opened his mouth, but each time he muttered to himself, "Oh, shut up. You'll only make 'em worse." Students who had attended the lecture declared that Professor Frazer had advocated bomb-throwing and obscenity, and the others believing, marveling, well, with uncircuitous appreciation of the scandal. Still Carl sat aloof on a pair of horizontal bars, swinging his legs with agitated quickness, while the others covertly watched him. Slim, wire-drawn, his china-blue eyes blurred with fury, his fair North skin glowing dull red, his chest strong under his tight football jersey, a clean-carved boy. The rubber band of his nose-guard snapped harshly as he plucked at it, playing a song of hatred on that hard little harp. An insignificant thing made him burst out. Tommy LaCroix, the French Canuck, a quick, grinning, evil-spoken, tobacco-chewing, rather likable young thug, stared directly at Carl and said loudly, "Another thing I noticed was that Frazer didn't have his pants pressed. Funny, ain't it, that when even these dudes from Yale get to be cranks. They're short on baths and tailors." Carl slid from the parallel bars. He walked up to the line of substitutes, glanced sneeringly along them, dramatized himself as a fighting rebel, remarked, "Half of you are too dumb to get Frazer, and the other half are old women gossips and ought to be drinking tea," and gloomed away to the dressing-room. While behind him the substitutes laughed, and someone called, "Sorry you didn't like us, but we'll try to bear up. Going to lick the whole college, Ericson?" His ears burned in the dressing-room. He did not feel that they had been much impressed. To tell the next day or two in detail would be to make many books about the mixed childishness and heroic fineness of Carl's partisanship. To represent 1,000 rumors running about the campus to the effect that the faculty would demand Frazer's resignation. To explain the reason why Frazer's charge that a Plato director owned land used by saloons was eagerly whispered for a little while, then quite forgotten, while Frazer's reputation as a crank was never forgotten. So much does muck represent the muck-raker. To describe Carl's brief call on Frazer and his confusing discovery that he had nothing to say. To repeat the local paper's courageous reports of the Frazer affair. Turk's great oath to support Frazer. Through hell and high water. Turk's repeated defiance. "Well, by golly, we'll show the mutts, but I wish we could do something." To chronicle dreary classes whose dullness was evident to Carl now after his interest in Frazer's lectures. Returning from Genie Linderbeck's room, Carl found a letter from Gertie Cowles on the black walnut hat-rack. Without reading it, but successfully befooling himself into the belief that he was glad to have it, he went whistling up to his room. Ray Cowles and Howard Griffin, those great seniors, sat tilted back in wooden chairs, and between them was the lord of the world, Mr. Bjorken, the football coach, a large, amiable, rather religious young man who believed in football, foreign missions, and the Democratic Party. "Hello. Waiting for me, the Turk?" faltered Carl, gravely shaking hands all around. "Just dropped up to see you for a second," said Mr. Bjorken. "Sorry the Turk wasn't here." Carl had an ill-defined feeling that he wanted to keep them from becoming serious as long as he could. Ray Cowles cleared his throat. Never again would the black-hair Adonis, blossom of the flower of Joralemon, be so old and sadly sage as then. "We want to talk to you seriously about something, for your own sake. You know I've always been interested in you, and Howard, and, of course, we're interested in you as frat brothers, too. For old Joralemon and Plato, eh? Mr. Bjorken believes. Might as well tell him now, don't you think, Mr. Bjorken?" The coach gave a regally gracious nod. Hitching about on the wood box, Carl felt the bottom drop out of his anxious stomach. "Well, Mr. Bjorken thinks you're practically certain to make the team next year. And maybe you may even get put in the Hamlin game for a few minutes this year, and get your P. Honest?" "Yes, if you do something for old Plato, same's you expect her to do something for you." Ray was quite sincere, but not if he put the team discipline on the bum and disgrace Omega Chi. "Of course I can't speak as an actual member of the team, but still, as a senior, I hear things." "I mean disgrace." "Don't you know that because you've been getting so savage about Frazer, the whole team's getting mad?" said the coach. "Cowles and Griffin and I have been talking over the whole proposition. You're boosting Frazer." "Look here," from Carl, "I won't crawl down on my opinion about Frazer. Folks haven't understood him." "Lord love you, son," soothed Howard Griffin, "we aren't trying to change your opinion of Frazer. We're your friends, you know. We're proud of you standing up for him. Only thing is, now that he's practically fired, just tell me how it's going to help him or you or anybody else now to make everybody sore by roasting them because they can't agree with you. Boost, don't knock. Don't make everybody think you're a crank. To be frank," added Mr. Bjorken, "you're just as likely to hurt Frazer as to help him by stirring up all this bad blood. Look here, I suppose that if the faculty had already fired Frazer, you'd still go ahead trying to buck them." "Hadn't thought about it, but suppose I would." "Afraid it might be that way. But haven't you seen by this time about how much good it does for one lone sophomore to try to run the faculty?" It was the coach talking again, but the gravely nodding, mandarin-like heads of Howard and Ray accompanied him. "Mind you, I don't mean to disparage you personally, but you must admit that you can't hardly expect to boss everything. Just what good'll do to go on shouting for Frazer? Quite aside from the question of whether he is likely to get fired or not." "Well," grunted Carl nervously, massaging his chin, "I don't know as it will do any direct good, except maybe waking this darn conservative college up a little, but it does make me so doggone sore." "Yes, yes, we understand, old man," the coach said. "But on the other hand, here's the direct good of sitting tight and playing the game. I've heard you speak about Kipling. Well, you're like a young officer, a subaltern they call it, don't they, in a Kipling story? A fellow that's under orders, and it's part of his game to play hard and keep his mouth shut and not to criticize his superior officers, ain't it?" "I suppose so, but—" "Well, it's just the same with you. Can't you see that? Think it over. What would you think of a lieutenant that tried to boss all the generals? Just same thing. Besides, if you sit tight, you can make the team this year. I can practically promise you that. Do understand this now. It isn't a bribe. We want you to be able to play and do something for old Plato, in a real way, in athletics. But you most certainly can't make the team if you're going to be a disorganizer." "All we want you to do," put in Ray Cowles, "is not to make a public spectacle of yourself, as I'm afraid you've been doing. Admire Frazer all you want to, and talk about him to your own bunch, and don't back down on your own opinions. Only don't think you've got to go round yelling about him. People get a false idea of you. I hate to have to tell you this, but some of the fellows, even in Omega Chi, have spoken about you and wondered if you really were a regular crank. Of course he isn't, you poor cheese, I tell them, but I can't be around to answer every one all the time, and you can't lick the whole college. That ain't the way the world does things. You don't know what a bad impression you make when you're too brash. See how I mean?" As the council of seers rose, Carl timidly said to Ray, "Straight now, have quite a lot of fellows been in saying I was a goat?" "Good many, I'm afraid. All talking about you. It's up to you. All you got to do is not think you know it all, and keep still. Keep still till you understand the faculty's difficulties just a little better. Savvy? Don't that sound fairly reasonable?" End of chapter 9.